Hey, greetings, Performance Reviews, where I give you the review from the technician's point of view. You'll have to excuse me, I have a little bit of a head cold today, but I wanted to talk about vacuum cleaner repair and vacuum cleaner repair pricing. Now, a lot of dealers charge a variety of pricing, and what is the right price? Well, it really depends on your market. Southern California is probably going to charge a little bit more than Timbuktu, Ohio. When we're talking about pricing, you have overhead, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but like the philosophy of repair and should you do a vacuum cleaner repair. Now, I have been surveying dealers for a long time in terms of their practices and what's going on. I generally like to know what's going on in the industry, and I've gathered that dealers in the United States generally charge between $100 and $200 for labor and the chemicals and things required for service. A lot of them will include like a rubber belt or something like that if it's necessary. That's the average price in the country. Generally charging $200 to repair a machine that was $1,000 or more. That's perfectly reasonable. Charging $200 to repair a machine that costs $200, now that doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of economy and scale. So if you have machines like, Shark or some low-end Hoovers that are, $150 to $300, $200 might be a little high, but charging $120, $140, probably pretty reasonable. Now you have to understand, is a vacuum cleaner worth fixing? And I have a whole video on that. I'd recommend you give that a watch. But a lot of times a vacuum cleaner is not worth fixing these days. However, there are machines that are really meant to be repaired. We see things like Sebo, Kirby, Miele, Rainbow. Those are machines that are designed to be repaired for a very long time, and you can repair over and over again, and you'll actually get your money out of those machines. Now, machines like Dyson, Shark, and really any of the low-end vacuum brands like Bissell, probably not worth spending a lot of time repairing. Now, this all comes from, I saw somebody post on Reddit that they charge $89 to service a bagless Shark, and that number kind of blew my mind, because I knew there's going to be a reason behind that, and it's not going to be a great reason. I think the first thing is they're probably just dumping it out, blowing it out with compressed air, and wiping out the outside with some 409 or something like that. So quick wipe and swipe job. They're not actually disassembling it, sanitizing it, or doing something like that. As you know, I put most of my machines through a part washer, so that's definitely not happening. The other reason I see pricing like that is cheap labor. And I'm not necessarily saying anybody is employing people who are illegal, but you have people who will work for less than their market value. I often see people with autism exploited by vacuum stores. That's something that's been going on for a very long time in the industry. You get somebody who really likes vacuums and they're just willing to work for next to nothing. And I can name countless people I know that's happened to over the years. So cheap labor could definitely be a reason they can get to that price. And then the other thing is a little bit more common is that they could be quoting low. There are numerous shops in my state that I know that do this, where they'll quote low and then they will double or triple the price after the machine's in there. I generally try to quote as high as possible at the door to give the customer two things. One, the more information they have, the more likely they are to replace the machine. And if they replace the machine, it's great if they buy a vacuum from me. Not necessarily. It's more about, if it's not worth doing, let's just be upfront with any of the costs. So a lot of times I have a 90% accurate quote at the door. Like the other day I had somebody drop a Kirby off and the machine needed a fill tube and I just couldn't see it. Well, that's a $20 part. So $20 on top of what was a $160 repair fee on a machine that's worth $2,000 new. That's pretty reasonable. We're not scamming anybody. But what some dealers do is they'll quote them $150. The customer drops them off and then they just call them up and quote them another $150 or $200 just out of nowhere. And they'll say, oh, it needs a deeper service or yada, yada, yada. It's a bunch of used car sales talk. That's a terrible practice. The other thing I can see cause a dealer to do cheap service is not properly protecting their employees, and I've seen this time and time again in vacuum stores. When you are dealing with the kind of particulate and dust, you need to take precautions, which means you need to have a mask, gloves, you should have an air purifier running in the back, and if you are blowing out or dumping out a bagless machine, that either needs to be brought outside or needs to be under a fume hood with ventilation. And I don't see a lot of dealers doing any of that, and that's really important. Not taking proper precautions, again, that's a corner they could cut where they're not spending that extra $5 or $10 per machine. The other thing I see happen is the business model. I have seen some dealers, and this started a lot with Oreck stores, where the service is free or it's at a ridiculously low cost, And again, just like the dealers who are calling up and doubling the fee, they then tack on things later. This is a terrible way to do it. The loss leader thing really doesn't work in business. We've seen it time and time again. Try not to do loss leaders, whether it's a certain product or service. Don't do it. Your time is worth something, and ultimately, the more upfront you can be with the customer about the price, the happier they're going to be. Even if they decide not to use that service, they're just going to be happy you quoted them right. They're going to be a lot angrier if you call them up later and you say, hey, it needs $80 worth of parts and the labor's free. They're going to be super suspect about that, as they should be. Now, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. What do I charge in my store for this? Well, for a basic bagged upright, something like an Orc, a Sanitaire, really old school machines that are just really simple that we can get done in like 20 minutes, I charge $110 for something like that. A basic bagless machine. This is any bagless machine that comes in that's just like your run-of-the-mill Walmart machine, or, maybe a Dyson stick vac, depending if it's a low-end stick vac. But if it's something like, a V15 or something, I'm going to charge more. I charge $140 is what I charge at my store. And then for like a premium upright or canister, this is something like a Kirby, a Rainbow. This is something really service intensive. I typically charge $150 to do that at my store. And then if it's a premium bagless upright, this is something, again, like a Dyson V15. This is something like bagless monstrosity that takes water, something like that. I will charge $170. And the reason for that is it is just a pain in the ass to deal with, and I'm going to charge for my time. A bagless premium canister, that's going to be something like a really dirty Rainbow or a Filter Queen that is just clapped when it comes in. I'm going to charge up to $170. And those are just for my labor and like the basic chemicals and things, PPE included in those prices. Now, when it comes to parts, I will just quote parts on top. I generally never quote more labor than I do up front. Let's say you bring that Filter Queen in and it needs a $40 brush roller. Well, as you can see, it's going to be a $210 bill. Again, I try to quote as much upfront as possible, and a lot of times, like things that are common like Kirby's, I am all the time quoting those prices into the 200s. Customers are fine with them. They know what the Kirby's worth. They know that the parts are pretty good quality, so it's worth fixing. Casebo X Series, a lot of those are starting to age, and I'm seeing weird things come in. I mean, people really have used and abused those machines for 20 plus years now. So I'll see an X1 come in and only like a back door or something. Again, I will quote upfront as much as possible because I don't want there to be any surprises to the customer. And I feel transparency and brutal honesty tends to be the best business policy in my experience over the years. In my experience, I've been in and out of vacuum stores since 2005. Tech, as a salesperson, I've been the manager of stores, and I am now an owner of my store. I specifically to do things differently than the rest of the industry, and that's what I'm doing. And knock on wood, it's been pretty good, a good ride so far. So hopefully this helps out some other dealers and also gives consumers a little bit of insight into why vacuum stores charge what they do. Have yourself a wonderful day. Please subscribe, like, and big thank you to our Patreons who help make all of these things possible.